Hello, and thank you for joining helamansarmy today. So, another continuation in the Consecration versus Communism conversation. This one specifically is just going to be a bunch of quotes. You'll see a picture of a bunch of men up here. There's going to be just quotes from all these men that I'm going to talk about, because there's not a lot on each of these men, but there's enough to do a quote here or there. And so instead of dragging this out with a bunch of videos, I figured let's just throw them all into one video. And to be quite honest with everybody, if you've made it this far in this particular video series, I got to be straight with you. I am getting very burnt out with talking about communism. I'm just tired of it. Like I don't find it very exciting at all. I'm interested in consecration. That's what I want to talk about, and that's what I want to discuss. But I think it's also really important to point out that that when it comes to communism, that the church has had a stance on this for many years, and it has from the beginning. Since if you've been watching all the way from Joseph Smith, and there are still members. I just recently ran across a member discussion on a message board where there was a member of the church that was actually defending democratic socialism, which really is just us saying, hey, we're stupid enough to vote for the destruction of our country. And that's really what it comes down to. And there are lots and lots of videos out there. You can get on YouTube and talk and look for the effects of socialism. There's lots and lots and lots of videos. There's lots of people giving testimonials about what socialism did to their country. And it's amazing to me that we still seem to have, even after all this, after all that there is and all that there's been said and all of the examples and the millions of dead, that we're still having this conversation. It doesn't make any sense to me that this conversation still even goes on that in a positive way. It shouldn't be happening, but it is. So this is just my little way of saying, hey, look, this is what the leaders of the church have said. This is what the prophets and apostles and general authorities have said about socialism and communism. And it's not, they do not have a very good view of it. I'll put it that way. So in order to avoid messing up all the different PDF files, because each one is in its own separate PDF, and there'd be lots and lots of them. Instead of trying to fumble around, I just copied and pasted every quote into just a document that then I made a PDF, so it's easy to follow through here on this in this format. So the video format. So just feel free to follow along. And as always, all of these references are going to be in the description. Every single one. I reference everything. I make sure I get you to the original source, because I don't. I'm always very wary of quotes that don't have a reference on them, and certainly don't go to the original source. And so, for instance, there's a Neil A. Maxwell quote that floats around on the internet, and I say quote because he said something very similar in General Conference, but it's been changed since from what he actually said to what somebody else wanted it to say. So it's not his quote, but it gets used all the time, and it drives me crazy. It's frustrating because it's not really a Neil A. Maxwell quote. It's still a good encouragement, but it's not a Neil A. Maxwell quote. Anyway, I'm going to stop on that. So into this, the first I'm going to start with is Sylvester Q. Cannon. This was in General Conference, October 1931. He said that there are others who advocate the principle of having all things in common. That is a very fine doctrine. A group that can subscribe to it wholeheartedly, labor unitedly, wisely, and diligently for the welfare of the whole, and maintain loyalty, altruism, and kindliness constantly, can doubtless succeed in developing a splendid community. But it requires all of these qualities. There needs to be an entire banishment of envy and greed from the hearts of those who would undertake it. How many are able to maintain the unselfishness necessary to bring about such a desirable condition? Then there is the doctrine of communism, which is more extreme. Under such a system, the properties of others might be forcibly taken for its adherents, and control exercised in all manners pertaining to labor, religion, and social relations. Some English writer, in a satirical mood, has given the following definition of communism in the extreme. What is a communist? One who has yearnings for an equal division of unequal earnings. Sluggard or scoundrel, or both, he is willing to fork out his penny and pocket your shilling. Such a description may not apply to many people, but it does apply to some who are selfish and covetous in their desires and are not willing to do their part in helping to earn and promote the welfare of the entire community. I've seen this a lot recently, actually. When talking about equality and equity, there are so many who are demanding equality and equity but are unwilling to actually put the work in for it. That's what it takes. It takes effort and it takes work. All right, on to the next one. That was Sylvester Q. Cannon, by the way, October 1931. Read Smoot, April 1933. And as you can see, I did put a link at the bottom of... Please don't type them in. Go to the description. They'll be in the description. We are living in trying times. International struggles are imminent. Nation rising against nation for supremacy and existence. Civilized governments are threatened by internal and destructive agencies in the form of communism. This secret organization assumes different names and forms. It is communism in France, socialism in Germany, internationalism in Spain and Italy. Nihilism in Russia, and similar sentiments and principles are cloaked under a variety of titles in America and Great Britain. All these organizations are opposed in spirit to all the restraints of law and order. Now let me call your attention to the fact that in February 1831, Joseph Smith received a revelation on this very subject, which no doubt many of you are familiar with. Reference is also made along the same lines in the Book of Mormon. Secularism and infidelity are sweeping over the world. Millions are indulging in every kind of iniquity. Crime is increasing with such rapidity that the large cities of the world find it next to impossible to cope with it. I know that it is easier to point out evils than the particular way of destroying them. I know it will take the united effort of honest, patriotic, liberty-loving citizens to meet the situation. The churches must play an important part. So I thought this one was actually really interesting because he's basically describing the world as we see it today in 2024, and it's been this way for a while in the United States, for quite a while actually. But we're seeing the exact same things happening today that he was talking about in 1933. All right, J. Reuben Clark, October 1934. My brethren and sisters, there are abroad in the world forces, and this I have been saying to you on every occasion that presented itself for the last 15 years, here in this pulpit. There are forces abroad that do not come from God. There is no dictatorship in the world today, whether that dictatorship be of one man or of a group of exercising such control as exists in Russia, that is not striking first and foremost at religion. They are trying to tear down the worship of God and to substitute something else in its stead. And I regret to say that in some parts of this country, in some states of this union, the issue now seems to be between an ordered, law-governed society and a despotism destructive of religion and of all that our government stands for. I assume this because of the past record of those who are advocating the measures to which I refer. May I say this? We believe that Christ will come and reign personally upon the earth. But that is no reason why I should advocate the establishment of a monarchy to overturn the government of the United States. We believe in the United Order, something that was taken away from us because we could not live it, and the lesser law was given, the law of tithing, which we are not living either. But our belief in the United Order is no reason why we should support a movement for communism to the overturning of our government. These two propositions are absolutely parallel. The one as rational and reasonable as the other. When the Lord wants his people to move to the United Order, he will use his anointed servant to direct the way. And that is true, and I believe actually that we have been slowly been moved towards the United Order, which I will discuss in a future video. We have been slowly moved towards the United Order, or more specifically, a personalized law of consecration, in such a way that we're not that far away from really fully living it. It's the way I see it. But I will explain that in a future video. All right, Melvin J. Ballard, April 1937. My brethren and sisters, I am also exceedingly anxious that the Latter-day Saints shall not only distinguish themselves in this spirit of brotherhood, that we love our brethren, but that we love them sufficiently to save them from humiliation and from sorrow and distress that will come unless we assist them in the solution of their economic problems. I am also anxious that we shall distinguish ourselves in a time when the whole world seems to be running wild with a spirit of change. When the war had ended, many of us rejoiced to see nation after nation abandon monarchical forms of government and establish democracies. And we thought, this is truly the beginning of the golden age for the world. Then we discovered with sorrow that there was much lacking to prepare the nations that had been for ages under kings and monarchies to be ready for democracy. They could not stand the trial of poverty and distress, and capitalizing upon the people's distresses, there arose leaders that overthrew these democracies, and they established dictatorships that will not bring this world to its peace. Nor will they liberate these people, but will enslave them, and they will never go forward under the plan of either communism or fascism that robs men of their liberties, of their property, and political rights. So this is interesting because clearly, as he's saying, they could not stand the trial of poverty and distress. So when you first go back to more freedom and more liberty, you end up with this situation where you actually go down a little bit. And you can see this in history, where we have this sudden poverty and distress because what we were used to leaning on isn't there anymore. But in the end, we lift up higher than if we were to have a despotic government that we're leaning against. And such is the case with the United States. When it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When the welfare state finally is unable to sustain itself, it really is a matter of when. Then it's going to be a very intense trial of poverty and distress. And at that time, we really are going to need to stand up for liberties and property rights, because that is the only way that a despotic government is not only fought against, but it is the despotic government that's the only way that they could potentially even try to prop up other people without them putting in the effort. So a trial of poverty and distress. It's interesting. It's an interesting concept and an interesting thought, but certainly something that we see through history. All right, Joseph F. Merrill. We fight against being taxed, but demand more and more of the benefits that taxes provide. Is this not a struggle to get something for nothing, at least to get more and more for less and less? We listen to smooth-tongued demagogues, accept as truth their wild vagaries, and enthusiastically follow their cunning and selfish leadership. Why? Is it not in the hope of getting for ourselves more and more for less and less? We become adherents of various groups, pay membership dues, sometimes participate in disturbances, and engage in various other kinds of activities. Why? Is it not the hope of getting more and more for less and less? In all these things do we stop to ask ourselves if our conduct squares with the 13th article of faith. We profess to hate communism and fascism, and stoutly deny that we would give the slightest support to either of these isms. Do we ever stop to think that in many respects these isms have much in common, and that many of the things we do are heartily supported by communists who see them in an application of communistic principles? We are willing to overthrow some of our established methods and institutions, apparently without realizing that in so doing we take a step after step that brings us nearer and nearer to communistic objectives. Joseph F. Merrill, October 1938. It makes a really good point. And if you look at our society today, and if you look at the behemoth that the United States government has become, you look at this giant megalithic bureaucracy. It's absurd at how many different bureaucracies there are. You know what? I remember when I first graduated from college and I went to work, and they're like, "Oh, you got to go talk to this guy because he takes care of this particular law that deals with this bureaucracy." And you go over and you'd be like, "Fine." And so you go and you'd have them review your paperwork and say, "Well, is that all I need?" "Oh no, now you got to go talk to this guy because he reviews this particular law that goes over this bureaucracy." And there's bureaucracy upon bureaucracy upon bureaucracy that just hinders and slows down work in every possible way. And it's pretty absurd. So really think, it's time, maybe it's time that there's a chainsaw brought to our bureaucracies to just cut them up into nothing, into dust. Personal opinion on that one. Okay, this one is Harold B. Lee. This one is actually a really important quote. It's kind of long, admittedly, but this one is actually a very important one. So I'll just highlight this paragraph. That's what I'm going to start with, and I'll just highlight paragraphs as I go. 5.5 years ago, when I, under an assignment from the First Presidency, accompanied Brother Melvin J. Ballard throughout the church to make an initial announcement of the present movement known as the Church Welfare Plan, he was asked everywhere, "Is this the beginning of the United Order?" And to all such questions, Brother Ballard's answer was the same. "No, it is not the beginning of the United Order, but it may be in this movement that the Lord may be giving his people an examination to see how far they have come towards a condition where they might live as one." And I think that's a very important important point in the stance that I've taken on the law of consecration and specifically the United Order, in that God has given us line upon line and precept upon precept to build us towards it. As I have thought about that question, and as I have thought about his answer, I have had difficulty understanding how a people who are not able to sacrifice to a point where they can pay 1/10 of their interest annually and abstain from 2 meals on the first Sunday of the month and pay that as an offering for the care of the needy, I have difficulty in understanding how we can believe that many of our people are more than 10% ready for the United Order. And I would agree with Harold B. Lee on that specific point as well. If we're not able to sacrifice everything, then there's no way that we'll be able to live. And remember, the law of consecration, the United Order is dependent upon the law of consecration. So if we're not consecrated, we're not consecrating our time, our talents, everything we have and everything we will have, then how in the world can we live the United Order? And 10% really isn't much in relation to it. Furthermore, I have difficulty understanding that they would be able to live in the United Order were it to be instituted in this day. I also have grave doubts that the prosperous times will make possible that happy day spoken of. I fear we must yet see more difficult and trying times than any we have yet passed through before such a day can come. And I would actually believe and follow Harold B. Lee on this statement. I believe that like J. Reuben Clark said, and I don't know if I feel like I've shared this quote with you guys, but I may not have, that if communism or socialism takes root in the United States, that it must be destroyed before the United Order could be set up or before the Second Coming. It has to be, because it is not God's way. So, and if that's the case, and if since we've accepted so much socialism in our country, I believe that we are going to have some very difficult times ahead, because there will come a time when it can no longer sustain itself. You can only take so much from the people who are willing to give, or in the case of the government, who are forced to give until they have nothing left to give. So there will come a time when it just can't hold itself up anymore. Now, this is the really important paragraph, very, very important paragraph, because this is one that really clarifies the law of consecration and why you can be a consecrationist in a capitalist society, but you cannot be a communist in a capitalist society. There are some things of which I am sure, and that is that the contrary to the belief and mistaken ideas of some of our people, the United Order will not be a socialistic or communist setup. It will be something distinctive, and yet will be more capitalistic in its nature than either socialism or communism, in that private ownership and individual responsibility will be maintained. I am sure also when it will come from the leaders of this church, whom you sustain as prophets, seers, and revelators, and will not come from some man who does not occupy that position. It will not come as a political program legislated by men not possessed of that authority. I am also convinced that the time is here when Zion must put on her beautiful garments, preparatory for the second coming of the Savior, and I believe firmly that that preparation is in progress. I am likewise persuaded that the church welfare plan is contributing mightily to that preparation. Again, I'm fully on board with Harold B. Lee here. I really like this part. It's the time where Zion must put on her beautiful garments preparatory for the second coming of the Savior. And this is one of the reasons I'm doing this particular video series is to encourage consecration. Now, we haven't really gotten to consecration much, but we will. It'll be a lot because, quite frankly, I'm tired of communism. I really want to talk about consecration because it's way more exciting. All right. I've realized this is going to be a long video, and I may cut this in half because I've got 19 pages of quotes, and this is page 6. So, and we're at 22 minutes. So, I may cut this in half. We'll see. I'm going to get to page 9 or 10, and we'll see where we're at. All right, Joseph F. Merrill, again, October 1946. The spirit of communism is unquestionably wholly foreign to the spirit of true Americanism, as seen in the country where it has long been dominant. It is wholly atheistic. It denies the existence of God, as frequently manifested. It is extremely cruel and inhuman. Confiscation and murder have been employed to reach its end. It should be impossible to get any Latter-day Saint to give the least degree of sympathy to communism as it is manifested in Europe. That was October 1946. I feel the same way about it in the United States, but yet we seem to somehow have forgotten that. Stephen L. Richards, October 1947. Now, I know that there are many in Christian nations and many in prominent places who accede to this taboo on religion in the consideration of national and world affairs. They seem to think that they can fight aggressive atheistic communism without uttering a word in defense and exposition of divinely given concepts, and without even seeking divine aid in the preservation of divine principles for the race. I do not pretend to qualify or speak as an expert on international affairs, but I am sure that I voice the sentiment and feeling of millions of God-loving people over the world when I assert that the sooner the issues now confronting the nations are recognized as a moral conflict between right and wrong, between truth and error, between Christ and Antichrist, the sooner will become the solution and peace. I know that this is and has always been the position of the Church. There are prophecies, ancient and modern, statements and declarations, and experience to support this position. So I picked out this particular quote to share simply because of that, exactly what he's saying, is that that it has to be seen as a moral conflict between right and wrong and between truth and error, between Christ and Antichrist. And we're actually really starting to see that. Like, we really have seen an explosion since 2020 when our governments went nutty. We've seen an explosion of this. This is a war between right and wrong, between truth and error, between Christ and Antichrist. So it gives me a lot of hope, and that's why I brought this one in here, is because there is hope out there, and it is supported by realizing that this is a battle. This is the war fought in heaven, that it never stopped, and this is it. Okay. This one was Joseph F. Merrill. Oh, here, he does talk about this is wonderful, because what I just said, this falls right into it. So, Unfortunately, in the PDFs, they were just these gigantic paragraphs. I really should have split them up. But I'm just going to go ahead and go to there. I don't know where, and then we'll just go there and see where it is. Now, the means Lucifer proposed to use to get all the Father's children returned to him, force, has been the means he has used ever since, whenever he has had power. But of course, he operates through those whom he can influence. An Omaha evening paper carried a lead editorial in its issue of the last Saturday, August 1941, entitled "Hitler, the Devil Incarnate." Hitler, as all the world now know, taught and believed in the use of power whenever it was necessary to reach his objectives. Satan, through his agents, has always done and is doing the same thing today. We see it being done in many different places in various ways, locally, nationally, and internationally. Struggles for power and staying in positions of power are everywhere in evidence. And that is, personal note here, that is one of the reasons why I do not vote for incumbents when it comes to politics. I don't, if you're already in office, get out. That's the reason, is because there are so many who are doing their darndest to stay in power. And if you look at the United States Senate and Congress, it is absurd how long some of those people have been in power, and they'll turn around and blame the president, whoever he is, whether Republican or Democrat. They'll blame the president and say, well, look at what he did. You've been there for 40 or 50 years. Get out. So that's my opinion. It's just, we have in our country the same problem. Or in the United States, there is the same problem. Whether you're in the United States or not, the United States has the same problem. And when power is obtained, it is commonly used to force obedience to unrighteousness, if not positively wicked demands. Needless to specify, for we see cases in evidence somewhere every day, in this country as well as abroad, but wherever they exist, they will generally be found on close examination to stem from sources where selfish, greedy, and unrighteous motives dominate. To sources, therefore, that are Satan-inspired, and the agencies operating under this wicked influence are steadily growing more numerous and more powerful, making the future of America more dark and precarious. And we see that today. This was in 1949. But we see that today, where we have a numerous number of agencies. It's almost like our politicians are trying to find reasons and ways to make new agencies. Well, can we just make an agency that does this or does that? It's really quite absurd. Unless this rapidly developing tendency changes for the better, the time is probably not far away when the America of the fathers, the America where free enterprise with all its associated blessings of personal freedom and liberty is for citizens, will have been relegated to the pages of history. And it is not strange, very strange from the standpoint of reason and logic, that the means and the conditions by which and under which America has grown to be the greatest, the most powerful, and the most prosperous nation on earth have become odious to vast numbers of our people, who therefore are scheming, planning, working, hoping, or even praying for changes that would put an end to America as the land of the free and the home of the brave. And that's true. We see it today, where people will just straight up say it's not the best country in the world, and they'll find reasons to try to tear America down. Satan tears down, God builds up. Among all the unrighteous organized agencies now working in the world to further the cause of Satan, perhaps the largest, most wicked are those given to the cause of communism. Communism is organized wickedness and crime of the blackest type. Harsh terms, certainly. Its objectives are confiscation of property, robbery of those who have, slavery of its productive workers, and death to its opponents. Its beneficiaries are ne'er-do-wells, those who own nothing but want everything, especially power and its emoluments. Yeah, there's a few agencies in the United States that I could point to and say, yep, you too are some of the most wicked, and it's the organized wickedness and crime of the blackest type. There certainly are agencies in the United States that I would categorize with that exact statement. Okay, this is number 10. maybe we'll just finish this up. I'll try to get through these very quickly. So Walter Stover, he was formerly the president of the East German Mission, and he said this in April 1952. I am one of the very few American citizens who have had the privilege of traveling in the Russian zone. I have been there more than 15 times and have visited practically every branch and district of our church there. I am happy to report that our faithful saints are privileged to hold their meetings. Of course, they have to have permission from the state each time they hold their meetings, and if they want to have a cottage meeting, they have to have permission. No more than 4 people are privileged to gather together at one time without having permission from the state. But as a whole, we are very grateful we have our freedom there. Communism is something different from democracy. Those die-hard communists do not believe in God. They are absolutely atheists. They call us stupid and ignorant. They cannot understand that in this enlightened age, there are people in the world who believe in God and in Jesus Christ. Their savior is Joseph Stalin. They look to Moscow for their salvation. So you should be able to find parallels real quick in the United States, especially in 2020. 2020 was a terrible, terrible year for the United States, and it was terrible for the government. 2020, 2021, that whole time period where the government said who can and who cannot meet. It should never have happened. Never once. And never again. I will never again stand down and say no. I will never do that. There's nothing I can think of that would stop me from meeting with other members of the church. It's not going to happen. So it's because it's a communist ideology. They want to have the state is the ones that are giving permission, and that's not the way it works. Our First Amendment is what gives us permission. God is who gives us permission. The First Amendment just upholds the permission that God gave us. Make sure I say that right, because I know someone's going to come along and be like, "Oh no, it's not the Constitution, it's God." Yeah, it is God that gives us that. All right, let's go on to the next one. 11. Harold B. Lee again. In October 1952, God grant that the gospel of Jesus Christ might be so effectively taught in all the world that the prayer of our president might be fully realized, that it might be an effective weapon against communism and dictatorship in nations and sin and wickedness in men. This is exactly the solution. God grant the gospel of Jesus Christ might be so effectively taught in all the world. Absolutely. That's exactly the solution. So, I haven't done Ezra Taft Benson yet, but think about what Ezra Taft Benson did. Think about what his message was. For many, many years, he talked about communism. For many, many years, he gave the warnings of communism and socialism. And then when he became the prophet of the church, there was a shift where all of a sudden he said, we need to flood the earth with the Book of Mormon. Flood the earth with the Book of Mormon. Keep that in mind, especially as we move forward. Keep it in mind. All right, Mark E. Peterson, October 1960. When I talk with young people about such a situation, I always like to ask them to consider the fruits of godlessness. What does it do to you to be without God? What does it do to you to be without religion? Can it benefit you or hurt you? I ask them to look around and see what kind of people the godless people are. I read a very interesting discussion the other day by one of our great Americans, Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, a man whom I respect highly. He pointed out in this discussion that one of the outstanding fruits of godlessness in the world right now is communism. Communism, he says, is a direct result of godlessness. Men who do not believe in God, who fight God, who put God out of their lives, and who try to eliminate him from the lives of everybody else are the ones who produced communism. Is communism something that you would like to take into your life? It is one of the fruits of godlessness. Do you want to have within you the fruits, or rather, I should say, the seeds of communism? Do you realize that the seeds of communism are sprouting even now from godlessness? Do you know what communism has done to the world? Do you know how it has spread? Do you remember Hungary, don't you? And you remember Poland? Do you want to have anything like that in your life? Do you want the fruits of godlessness to become a part of you and your future? Mark E. Peterson, 1960, and he's right on the money there. We always see it. It always seems to pop up among, and I'm going to point out, it always pops up among those who consider themselves to be intellectual. I'm educated and I'm highly knowledgeable. Therefore, I can solve this problem. No. You have to let people do it for themselves and get out of the way. But it's always the godless atheists who try to prop up socialism and communism every single time. Hugh B. Brown, October 1960. Now, brethren, we who are assembled tonight here and in 320 other places should form a great bulwark against communism and its attendant evils. The efficiency of our opposition to them depends upon the way we honor our priesthood and place ourselves in a position to seek and obtain God's help in fighting evil. Communism is of the devil. Communism started when the devil was cast out of heaven because of his rebelling against the wills of his Father, that men should have free agency. Satan and his emissaries would rob men of their priceless freedom. We do not wish tonight to enter into a long discussion of this evil, but it is well that all men know that the church and the leaders of the church stand squarely against communism. We call upon the priesthood of the church to stand together with a solid front against everything that would rob men of their God-given freedom. That has not changed. I have yet to find anything from church leadership that has changed that stance. Harold B. Lee, April 1964. The greatest strength of the church is not the number of units we have, not the amount of tithing that is paid, nor the congregations, but the greatest strength is the united and fervent testimonies that are in the hearts of the church members. And by the same token, we might say that the greatest weapon against all untruth, whether it be in science, so-called, or in the philosophies of the world, or in communism, or whatnot, the greatest weapon is the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which preached in power will be a bulwark against these false ideas in the world today. Bam. Beautiful. So, but the greatest strength is united, fervent testimonies that are in the hearts of the church members. One of the things I love to do is to have people come on and share their testimony with me, because it is one of the greatest strengths is our united, fervent testimony. So please shoot me an email, helamansarmy@proton.me. There's a link I'll put a link in my description on this video, but if you click on the Helaman's Army YouTube page and click on the About, there's a link to the email there. Shoot me an email. I would love to have you on and have you share your testimony specifically for this purpose, to be a bulwark, to be a weapon in the truth, a weapon against the godless truths of the world by sharing your testimony. Please join in. Okay, Thorpe B. Isaacson. This nation under God cannot condone communism in the least degree. There is not such thing as a little communism. It is the greatest threat to America today. Belief in God is the foundation of America. Oh, proud we should be of our pilgrims, Puritans, and pioneers. It was their belief in God that drove them forward, for without that faith, that belief, they could not have continued. That's true. And if you remember back to the John Taylor video that I did on communism and consecration, I talked about the Icarians and how they basically walked in and bought up Nauvoo, and then they did just an awful job of getting their ideas implemented, and they ended up failing. So keep that in mind. All right. Harold B. Lee, again, man, Harold B. Lee had so many good quotes. All with righteous desires are opposed to sin. Some years ago, I participated in a panel discussion at the University of Utah with public officials, businessmen, and a district judge, as well as professional men of the university. The district judge made a profound statement when he declared that the great need in the fight against lawlessness, against immorality, against atheism, socialism, communism, or other related ills is faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. All right, so we're starting to see in the 30s and 40s and 50s, they're kind of talking about, hey, we need to beware of communism. And then we're into 1966, and Harold B. Lee starts saying, hey, you know what? What do we do about it? Well, this is what we do about it. We make sure we increase our faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. And one of the best ways to increase our faith is through pure testimony, bearing your testimony. This is exactly how Alma and the sons of Mosiah taught the gospel. If you recall, I'm gonna mess this up. I know. I think it's Alma chapter 4, verse, I want to say it's either 19 or 20, where he talks about how they decided to go out and teach the gospel, that they were going to go out and bear pure testimony. So, yeah, really, seriously, join in. Your testimony is worth more than you know and more than you realize. Join in. Join in as a voice of reason and a voice of faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Lauren C. Dunn, April 1971. And here's where you start to see the change. We're no longer in PDF files. It'll actually send you to if you've got it on your phone, the LDS app or onto the website. So even in Russia, where its people have drunk the well of socialist morality for 50 years, there is an indication of desire for something more nourishing. In studying religion in Russia today, journalist Paul Wohl states that socialist morality has been accepted as the official yardstick of good behavior. But whether Soviet man is more harmonious than his predecessor is a moot question. A scientific outlook is there, says Wohl. But so is religion. Its comeback, he says, is a phenomenon which the ideologists of communism cannot explain, and about which they prefer to remain silent. He states that the move towards religion is primarily sparked by young people. So we have a generation that moved away from God, and then all of a sudden there's all these young people that are like, this really sucks, and they start moving towards God. This is that pride cycle we talk about in the Book of Mormon all the time. And I think, honestly, we're starting to see that in the United States today, but I think we're seeing so many young folks that are just absolutely appalled by the churches that they're going to. Honestly, and this is just a side statement and a side thing that I'm going to just mention. I've been watching a lot of Protestant preaching, and a lot of it's really good. But I've also been paying attention to how they treat each other and how they talk to each other. And quite frankly, had I grown up as a Protestant in the United States, at this point in my life, I am absolutely positive that I would have said no thank you to all of them. I would have said, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And I would most likely be an agnostic or at least antagonistic towards church in general, which is exactly what we're seeing across the board. Pew Research did their research in, it's been a while since it was released admittedly. I want to say it was 2020 or 2021, maybe 2022. But they documented a 20% drop in Protestant Christianity across the board in the United States over the last decade, since 2010. And so if we're looking at that same, information, for Latter-day Saints and for Catholics or Christian Orthodox religions, you're not seeing that same drop. Latter-day Saints, you're actually, because our numbers are small enough, you're actually seeing a very consistent staying the same in relative. If we were to dial in on Latter-day Saints, you might see a little up and down here and there, because there are people who do leave the church, obviously. But overall, we're slowly growing every year. The Orthodox Christians, just steady. They're just steady. Catholics, over the last same decade, instead of seeing a 20% drop like Protestants have, they've seen a 2% drop. So when you talk to Protestants, they're going to say, "Oh, well, it's secularism. That's our problem." No, it's you. You look to yourselves. Look in your hearts. Look who you are and who you've become. The way you treat each other and the way you talk about God and the way everything is now entertainment. It's, if you watch them, it's entertainment. That's all it is. And it's really quite sad to see it happen, but it is. It's exactly what it is. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox here and move on. But that's exactly what it is. I'm seeing, at least what I believe I'm seeing, is we're seeing young people who are who find this interest in religion, and so if you're not if you're not actively sharing your testimony online, a lot of young people nowadays are online. They're talking about things online. There's discussion boards online. There's a lot of young folks joining online communities, looking for information about the church, trying to understand the church. Get in there and get to talking to them. Get Get your testimony in there, whether it's sharing it through my YouTube channel or somebody else's YouTube channel or through different means. Just share it. Just talk about it. Okay. Number 18, Bruce R. McConkie, April 1980. Looking ahead, and this is interesting because we see in the 60s there was this massive explosion of discussion on communism and socialism, and then in the 70s it really started to die off, and then by 1980 was kind of like that. There's a weird cutoff line, like 1980, people stopped talking about it. Bruce R. McConkie mentions it. Said, looking ahead, we see the gospel preached in all nations and to every people with success attending. We see the Lord break down the barriers so that the world of Islam and the world of communism can hear the message of the restoration. And we glory in the fact that Ishmael, as well as Isaac and Esau, as well as Jacob, shall have an inheritance in the eternal kingdom. We see congregations of the covenant people worshiping the Lord in Moscow and Peking and Saigon. We see saints of the Most High raising their voices in Egypt and India and Africa. This was Bruce R. McConkie, April 1980. I'm right there with him. So one of the best ways that we can share the gospel, it's very inefficient to go knocking on people's doors. It's super inefficient. But if you make a little video of yourself and put it on YouTube or put it on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, on X, or whatever social media network, in the language of the people that you're trying to target, you're going to find dramatic success. You're going to find people. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of people that are going to say mean things and nasty things, but you're going to find people. I fully believe that the way that we're going to get into every nation, kindred, tongue, and people is not through the missionary program, but it's through us as Latter-day Saints sharing the gospel over social media. It's one of the reasons I do this. Actually, it is the reason I do this. But I can only speak English. I've been considering other possibilities, maybe trying to team up with someone who speaks Hindi to share messages in India, or Russian to share messages in Russia, or whatever language it is, whatever people they are. Social media is the way. We are the advertisement. So I encourage you to at least ponder that and think about it in relation to Elder Bednar encouraging us to be out on social media. So sharing the gospel, make that very clear. Social media can be either a very good place or a very evil place. It's a double-edged sword. And so I'm trying to sharpen the righteous sword, the righteous side of that sword, the righteous edge. All right, last one. There's not a lot in this particular quote, but this is the last time that communism was discussed or even mentioned in General Conferences, April 2006, Dallin H. Oaks. He said, note that these promised manifestations of the Lord are to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. Today we are seeing the fulfillment of that promise in every nation where our missionaries are permitted to labor, even among peoples we have not previously associated with Christianity. For example, we know of many cases where the Lord has been manifesting himself to men and women in the nation of Russia, so recently released from the long grip of godless communism. While reading critical or mocking articles about Mormons, two different Russians felt a strong impression to search out our meeting places. Both met missionaries and joined the church. April 2006, Dallin H. Oaks. And I think that's important to point out, is that even those articles or the people who are mocking the church will actually help drive people towards the church, because not everyone will fall for the propaganda. There's a lot of people who will look at that and say, wait a second, I'm going to go figure this out. You've piqued my interest, and they'll join the church. So whether it's in Russia, whether it's in India, whether it's in China, whether it's in Nepal, whether it is in Australia or New Zealand or anywhere in Africa, Europe, share the gospel. If you can speak the language, put out a video in that language for those people, and let them hear it, because you are the advertisement, you and your family. And when I say advertisement, I'm not saying that we're trying to monetize all this and get people into our church for any of that. I'm saying it's an awareness thing, right? Like it's hey, we're here and we have the fullness of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And there's a big difference between being restored and reformed. And I'll talk about that in a different video, not in this series, but I have a plan for another video about that. But this ends the conversation here with this, just all of these quotes. I find it interesting the way that it moved from beware of communism, godless socialism, and godless communism to share the gospel. It went that whole way to go share the gospel. And so I'm very tired. I'm kind of burned out with this communism subject. As I've mentioned a couple times, I am going to do a video on Ezra Taft Benson, and I am going to do a video comparing and contrasting consecration and socialism and communism together. I don't know if I'll do those three that compare and contrast in one video or two videos, but I will do a compare and contrast probably in one video, because socialism and communism, they're basically the same. There's not much difference. And then if you're saying, well, what about democratic socialism? And I would just say, well, you're just dumb enough to vote for it. That's the difference, right? Like, one of them, communism, a lot of times is forced upon people. Socialism, a lot of times is forced upon people. Democratic socialism is that we were dumb enough to vote for it. So that's my thought for today. And I would encourage all of you, again, share the gospel. Open your mouth. If you just want to get on and do a quick 1-minute testimony, that'd be awesome. I would love it. If you want to just share with me a 5-minute testimony, that'd be awesome. If you want to share it on a different platform, or with different people, or in a different way, please go do it. Just please share your testimony. But I would love to hear it. And I'd love to share it with you. If you think that me facilitating that would be in your best interest or of interest to you, then please shoot me an email, helamansarmy@proton.me. That's what I want to have, and that's what I want to hear, is pure testimony. So please, if you feel that, let me know. But that is my message for today, and I give you this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.